Okay, I think we can start off this. Good morning, and I welcome all of you for this another episode of BIT and BYTE, the interactions with BIT alumni. We have with us today one of our distinguished alumnus, Vidya Setlur, and she passed out from BIT in the year 2000. And then on, she carried on for higher studies and then working in many multinational companies. Vidya Setlur is the director of Tableau Research right now. She leads an interdisciplinary team of research scientists in the areas including data visualization, multidimensional interaction, statistics, applied ML, and NLP. She earned a doctorate in computer graphics in the year 2005 at Northwestern University. Prior to joining Tableau, she worked as a principal research scientist at Nokia Research Center for seven years. Her personal research interests lie at the intersection of natural language processing and computer graphics. Her research combines concepts and methods from information retrieval, human perception, and cognitive science to help users effectively interact with devices and information in their environment. A significant portion of her work covers the investigation, prototyping, and evaluation of such novel concepts. So she's a very active researcher, and recently she has also published a book uh, called as Functional Aesthetics for Data Visualization. Normally, whenever somebody authors a book, I'm very excited because we used to search for reference books when we were students, and we always regarded the authors as gods who can write the books for the people. And I'm very happy to see that some of our own alumnus are writing books, and that is so popular. I was just going through the Google Scholar statistics. Vidya has got a very high statistics, H index and IN index and all those things. The number of citations are very huge, and this will be an eye-opener for all of our faculty members and students. It is one of the measures that how many citations our research papers are published. Since in the higher education sector now, for all the institutions like ours, BIT, in addition to teaching, the involvement in research, publishing, patenting are getting more and more weightage, and the institutes are also ranked based on these statistics. So in this background, I feel today's interaction with Vidya will definitely motivate all of our students, and also it will give some tips to our faculty members in this direction, since Vidya is doing a lot of research in the most relevant state-of-the-art technologies, especially the natural language processing and computer graphics. So with this brief introduction, I welcome Vidya once again. And Vidya, thank you very much for accepting to be with us today as one of our distinguished alumni. So this we started actually last year, this bit and byte interactions, just to get some insights and your memories about BIT when you were studying. What was the condition? How were the professors? What kind of papers and research papers you used to refer for your project was? Just to recall whatever you remember, and briefly that, and then maybe we get in slightly more focused present role where you are in. So regarding academics and learning experience, can you share some experiences that you remember, some subjects, some classroom experiences, some teachers that you can remember from your memories?
Yeah, so thank you, Ashwath sir, for inviting me. It's very kindly put together this forum. I love the name Bit and Byte. It's a really nice, catchy way of engaging alumni from BIT. I was reflecting on kind of my student life at BIT and just my journey. And I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I did elementary school in the US and ended up coming to India for high school. finished high school and 11th and 12th, and then joined BIT for undergrad. So I have lived in, both countries and done education in both places. And I think for me, I've always enjoyed creative hands-on learning rather than rote memory. I mean, and that was kind of the stark contrast I had between US institutions and Indian institutions. And so, after finishing 12th and joining BIT, I think for me, the biggest memory was, oh, I don't have to memorize answers to questions anymore. I can actually go to the library and find responses to questions and do my own research and answer these questions in my own words. And I think that to me was extremely liberating. And it really gave me an early sense of what creative open-ended research can look like. I had a lot of support. I think back in the day, Professor Nandagopal was the chair of the computer science department. There was Shobha ma'am, and I had a very kind of warm and welcoming environment in computer science, and it really instilled into me kind of the love for the subject. My personal favorite subjects were, computer programming, taking a C class, a C++ class, going to the lab and trying out a bunch of programs and getting my algorithm to work. I think all of those were really exciting. I do have some kind of, I would say, more like funny incidents, but in the first year, at least when I did engineering at BIT, I don't know if students now take chemistry classes, intro to chemistry class, but I remember, my first chemistry lab at BIT, I had to do titration and, get the endpoint when colorless liquid turned pink. I remember turning the faucet of the pipette a little too quickly, and it became a dark pink. And my first lab was getting a 0 and having to redo my experiment again. So I definitely was, much more careful moving forward with that. But I think in addition to that, I just was reflecting on the variety of subjects. So even though my degree was in computer science, the first few years you end up taking classes in mechanical engineering, you do engineering drawing, and so you get kind of a sampling and a variety of the various engineering disciplines before you kind of start specializing in computer science. And to me, I think that gave me kind of an insight into all the possibilities that I could do. So when I finished engineering at BIT, I sort of had an inkling in terms of which subjects I wanted to specialize in and pursue when I ended up doing my PhD. So I have a lot of warm memories of BIT, and I think, in fact, a few years ago, I did visit the campus and meet some of my teachers on campus. So it has a very special place in my heart. And I think that kind of open, inquisitive way of learning really got me started onto my research career. So that's my long answer to your question.
Thank you, Vidya. Why I asked this question is normally we compare institutions, which is a good institution, BIT. Since you had your early schooling in US and coming back here, only attended 11th and 12th and then engineering. How do you see the culture, campus culture, the interaction between the student to student and student to faculty? How you perceive BIT with your earlier experience? How was the culture at that point of time? Is it easy to interact with your faculty members, meet HODs and others? How was that? How do you rate BIT in that direction?
I think BIT always had a very open culture. I felt extremely comfortable going into the staff room and interacting, with my professors and even with you, Ashwath sir. I mean, I was part of the placement cell along with a few of my classmates, and what I really appreciated with you in particular was just kind of your open entrepreneurial nature of how you wanted to increase companies, the presence of companies coming onto the campus and getting students placed in companies as soon as they graduated. You didn't have a very specific way that we were supposed to run placement cell. You kind of empowered us to figure it out, and I really appreciate that. And I felt like, yes, there was a degree of respect that we followed when we interacted with all of you, but at the same time, we were not intimidated or we were not scared to kind of speak up or brainstorm our ideas. We were able to do that pretty freely, almost like colleagues. And I I experienced that kind of as a refresher from some of the rigidities that I experienced with high school in India. Maybe things have changed now. And to a large extent, that kind of open door policy that BIT had has a lot of similarities with the way campuses are in the US as well.
Yeah, thank you. Another important thing is you also just now mentioned about experiential learning. And for that purpose, I remember during 2000, we had Y2K problems and other things. We also explored the possibilities of giving some information and training to the students on AS400 and mainframes and other things. So with that background, how do you see BIT? And how was the transition from the institute to the higher education or to the industry? And how BIT supported you in that direction? Was it easy transition for you, or you have to struggle to get into the higher educational institutions and industry?
I think that the projects that we ended up doing in 7th and 8th semester were pretty instrumental in kind of setting me up for success for higher education. So in particular, just the curriculum called for working with an external organization to complete a project. And in my case, I ended up doing a project at IISc with Professor Narahari. And that combined with, I think, BIT's future forward thinking. So yeah, I mean, the Y2K problem was a critical problem in 2000. And some of that kind of informed the type of project that I worked on. This was at a time when the internet had taken off. There were a lot of services that were available on the web. So my particular project at the time was exploring e-commerce auctions. This was kind of before eBay, websites like eBay, reached a certain point of maturity. So to me, doing a project reflecting on sort of the growing potential of the internet in around 1999, 2000, I think was critical for me in demonstrating that I was focused on problems that were relevant at that time, and being able to demonstrate that I'm interested in real world problems and trying to solve those real world problems for the users. And so, getting into a PhD program, was relatively straightforward. Now, was my PhD career, the launch of it, an easy cakewalk? No. I mean, this is why I kind of tell people who are interested in pursuing a PhD, particularly for research, you don't have to be brilliant or super smart to get a PhD. You actually have to be extremely resilient and patient with yourself, because there are a lot of failures along your journey. There's a lot of paper rejects. There's a lot of long hours that you end up spending in the lab with minimal returns. So it takes a lot of time and almost kind of robustness and patience to keep trying and keep learning from your mistakes, so you're set up for success. And so to me, I think, yes, I mean, I think the experiential learning in BIT helped me, but it was also, I think, just reflecting back, getting a recognized engineering degree from a country that is, a developing country, right? It's not a developed country like the US. There are a lot of, inherent problems. Simple things like back in the day, we would have electricity shutdowns right before an exam. And, I have, this was before we had a UPS system installed in the house. So I would study under candlelight, preparing for the semester exam the next day. Or, there were mosquitoes. I mean, but now there's not that many mosquitoes, but I would end up sitting in a mosquito curtain and studying. And I think that level of just adversity and just appreciation, kind of holistically as part of my education in India, I think set me up for the level of adversity that I would face in my PhD journey, and just coming out strong from that. So so that's, I think, the mix of kind of the education and the experience that I got at BIT.
Yeah, thank you. And as I see, you have published very high quality research papers. I think the count is, as per the available resources, more than 170 quality papers, and many patents are there to your credit. That is a huge effort, and I congratulate you on behalf of all my colleagues at BIT to this. I will come back to you to talk about how the alumni can engage in the development of the institute and supporting the students, present students, a little later. Right now, you can go ahead with your slide presentation, and then we will come back for the question and answer session. You can start sharing your presentation.
Okay, sounds good. I think it's asking me to install something. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you can also
Can you
see the slide.
Okay. All right, I was muted. Okay. So how much time do I have? Because I can go quickly, I can take some time, whatever
Yeah,
works
you can take some time, no problem.
Okay.
As I said,
All
it
right.
will be recorded, and it will be shared with all others later.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Let me just. All right. So I thought I'd spend some time talking about what I call functional aesthetics in the space of data visualization. And given that there's so much focus and attention on large language models, I thought I'd spend some time talking about how we use these LLMs in the area of visual analysis. So As Ashwath sir introduced me, I'm the Senior Director of Tableau Research. I've been at Tableau since 2012 when it was just a startup. So I was one of the founding members of the research team, and it's been a couple of years since I started heading the team. So we are an industrial research team, which is slightly different from academia. So in academia, professors tend to do a lot of teaching. If it is a research institution, they also do research through their grad students and publish papers. Given that my team sits within a company, which is Tableau Salesforce, so Tableau was acquired by Salesforce several years ago, we focus on serving the company's mission of helping people see and understand data. So we work on prototypes and concepts that help our customers. And while we're thinking of helping our customers and inspire product and technology directions within the company, we also publish at some of the top conferences, which are usually IEEE Biz, as well as a bunch of ACM conferences like SIGCHI, which focuses on computer-human interaction. So my team is pretty multidisciplinary. So we do things like using gestures, augmented reality, multimodal interaction with data. We also work on a lot of natural language interfaces, which is kind of my own personal research in helping people learn how to interact and explore their own data. And I've provided the URL here of our external facing website. So if you're interested in reading any of the papers, I'd encourage you to go and check it out. So I know it's a little before lunchtime in India, so I thought I would show a picture of some food. This is a Japanese bento box. Normally when I give this talk in person, I ask people in the audience to tell me what do they find interesting about a bento box. So a bento box is kind of like a thali, right? I mean, you have different compartments of food items. Usually the main dish occupies the largest space in a container, and it is supported by these condiments and side dishes. And there is kind of a harmony in terms of how these dishes are composed within this box. And I would argue that it's functional because it helps you to have a good meal, but it's also aesthetic. I mean, there's a beautiful presentation in front of you, and it kind of entices you to enjoy the meal. So I'm going to revisit this image towards the end, but kind of explain how this is relevant to data visualization. So what do I mean by functional aesthetics? So functional aesthetics is this concept of combining perception, semantics, and intent, where all three of these concepts work together as a whole, creating beauty in meaningful design. And you can kind of see this work even in spaces around you. You see a beautifully done building with big bright windows with a lot of light coming in. There is a certain element of aesthetics that come into play in kind of helping you use that space as effectively as possible. So I thought as part of this talk, I would go through, some concepts around the role of perception and how that is used to help see and understand your data. And given that my background is in natural language processing, I wanted to show you some examples where semantics is useful in understanding the meaning of the data. And at the end of the day, because we are creating interfaces and tools for actual people to explore their data, we need to understand their intent. What are their goals when they're trying to reason about their data and answer their questions? So first part is perception. This is a picture of Yosemite Valley, which is actually in California, where I live right now. And it's one of my favorite views of Yosemite. You see this magnificent bluish gray rock jutting out behind these evergreen trees. And, in the foreground, you see some wildlife and kind of pristine reflection of nature in water in front of it. And all of this really kind of invigorates our senses. And this is kind of a reason why we like to go out to nature and rejuvenate. So in a way, our eyes are perceiving the environment around us and trying to make sense of it. So let's do a little exercise here. And given that it's online, I'll let you guys think about this for a few seconds. I'm showing you a table of various beverages like coffee, espresso, herbal tea, and just regular tea with the amount of profit for the various regions like Central, East, South, and West. And if I ask you a question saying, look at this table and try to find the subcategories of these beverages that have the most losses, right? If I give you a few seconds, your eyes are probably scanning from left to right, top to bottom, trying to make sense of where are the losses happening. So I'll give you a few seconds to kind of look at this table. But if I actually make it, slightly easier where I'm highlighting the beverages that have losses in red and put them in parentheses, your eyes immediately focus on these numbers that are in red. But even then, you're probably computationally figuring out which one has the most losses by doing a pairwise comparison of these numbers in your brain. But if we were to use data visualization, where the amount of loss is encoded in color, the brightest red means the highest loss, and the length of the bars depict the amount of loss, then you don't have to do that kind of visual comparison in your head, but you can immediately look at the bars and try to make sense of it. So the whole premise here from kind of field of data visualization is leveraging the fact that our human visual system is extremely powerful. We are able to glean patterns from the world and the information around us quite intuitively without any extra information. And this is what we call kind of pre-attentive processing, where your eyes are immediately going to patterns that are interesting and making sense of it. So another one of my favorite perceptual exercises is this. So if I give you a bunch of words and I ask you to say the color, not the word, and usually this exercise needs to be done where you say the color out loud. So you start with red, blue, green, yellow, green, black. Now, if you notice here, the color and the word are not aligned. And that really messes up your brain because you're trying to say the word, but you have to force yourself to say the color. And this is called Stroop effect, where the information encoded in this word does not align with its visual representation. And that can cause a cognitive disconnect in your brain, and you have to think harder. Now, how does that relate to data visualization? So if I am visualizing a bunch of produce, maybe I'm a farmer or a shop owner and I'm trying to sell a bunch of vegetables, I'm looking at the cost, where I'm looking at the average cost per cup equivalent. Because the colors that are used to represent the vegetables are not semantically aligned, I have to kind of go back to the legend and go back to the bars to try to make sense of the visualization. So this was some of my early work that I did at Tableau when I joined, which created an algorithm within Tableau that automatically looked at these categories of items in the data and tried to find semantically resonant colors that best match this. So for example, on the right, you see green representing broccoli as opposed to blue, orange for carrots, yellow for corn, and so forth. And so this tries to mitigate the Stroop effect that I described a couple of slides ago, because a semantically resonant color palette arguably creates a more effective visual representation and in part helps in better understanding the underlying data. So in addition to coming up with semantically resonant visual information so that it aligns well with your human visual system, it's also important to figure out how much information needs to be shown in a particular chart or visual. So these are some examples from, the cartographic or the map community, where for, many, many years, kind of way back, even before computers were invented, map makers understood how the visual system worked. And they did things that were, seemed very intuitive, but also extremely clever, where they figured out that, the most important information in a map needs to be emphasized and the less important information needs to be de-emphasized. For example, you probably use a Google map on your phone for navigation. If you observe how a navigation map in Google works, is the source and destinations are much more prominent. It'll probably highlight critical turns that you have to make in order to reach your destination. So it's not a realistic rendering of the actual information, but it's trying to generalize the information in such a way that it is more understandable. And so the different ways of generalizing information, such as exaggerating, features that need to call attention to, or aggregating similar clusters of objects into one, or even simplifying or removing some of the visual clutter that you see in typification, for example, as well as prominently labeling important places. So I took this kind of notion of information generalization from the map community, and I was interested in exploring how that can map to other charts, like line charts. So this was a particular paper that I worked on with an intern of mine, where we looked at existing line charts and we wanted to simplify it for different sizes. So on the left, you see a very detailed line chart with axes, labels, and titles and annotations. And then as the form factor or the aspect ratio of this line chart diminishes all the way to the extreme right, you see that only the extrema, that is the minimum and the maximum points, are highlighted. So I'm going to just show you a video of how this works in practice. So I'm taking this line chart and I'm using a slider to kind of mimic a reduction in aspect ratio. And as you see the slider moving to the left, you see that details get simplified until it reaches this really simplistic spark line. And then as I move the slider to the right, more and more details get added. So this algorithm looks at visual features in the line chart and tries to figure out what information at which particular size needs to be preserved and what information can be de-emphasized. Okay, all right. So just a quick set of takeaways from kind of this perception unit, just to reiterate, and I think these are really important as you walk away from this talk. Representation of information is often context, task, and data specific. And so when you're thinking about any sort of visual representation of information, you need to think about what is most important and you need to emphasize that. And the level of detail in a view needs to outweigh whatever information you choose to de-emphasize or remove from a view. And I think those are really important principles when you're thinking about data visualization or any sort of visual representation. So let's move on to the second part of functional aesthetics, which is semantics. And semantics has a lot of human component to it. As humans, we often have a conversation. Maybe it's around a campfire when you go camping, where you're trying to understand and make sense of the people around us as well as the environment that we exist in. And this manifests in different ways. It can be very different when you're engaged at work or you're having a project discussion with your classmates. The way in which we reason about the world can be very different when you're in the library and you're looking at a book. It can also be different for a child who is just lost in nature, maybe perhaps observing a butterfly fluttering among the plants, or enjoying a social dinner when you go out with your friends, right? So each of these scenarios and contexts have different set of semantics or meaning when you're trying to understand and reason about the environment. So one of my kind of favorite examples of visual representation and semantics are symbols. So when I travel, to conferences and I go to different places, excuse me, I love looking at symbols in the local regions. A lot of these symbols have very specific cultural connotations. Some of them are fairly universal. For example, the mask and the hand washing. I think all of us got pretty familiar with that during COVID. Street signs. Sometimes you see interesting street signs in different parts of the country or, different parts of the world. And then, just because technology has become ubiquitous, especially with emojis and WhatsApp, I think, people have become very adept at using emojis instead of words when they text and want to try to express semantics through visuals. So some of my earlier work was inspired by the use of symbols, and the need here was, charts by themselves are inherently abstract. And what do I mean by that? The reason why I initially was explaining what industry research is we are often looking at customer problems. So when we were looking at ways in which Tableau customers were using Tableau, we found that a lot of people were trying to make charts like the one that I showed you, and I'm going to explain this chart in a bit. And they spent a lot of time adding icons and trying to add additional semantics to them. So we were really looking at ways in which we could automate some of that. So coming back to this example, this is a scatter plot that is plotting the body mass on the x-axis and brain mass on the y-axis. And this was originally authored by this famous scientist and statistician, Carl Sagan. So it's called the Sagan plot. And when you look at this chart, you can sort of make sense of it, but especially on the upper right, because there's not much space, you're probably distracted by the labels like blue whale and dolphin or male gorilla, the black arrows and the blue dots. And you're trying to make sense of which labels correspond to which blue dots. But if we replace these labels with icons, all of a sudden there's more space on the scatter plot, and these icons arguably are easier to recognize, and you can kind of look at the pattern because you look at the hummingbird at the bottom left, which has tends to have a lower brain to body mass ratio. And then you look at the upper right and you see the elephant and the blue whale, which is kind of interesting, where you have two large sized mammals that have a really high brain to body mass ratio. And then there's a cluster of animals in the middle. So this particular project was addressing this customer problem where customers were spending a lot of time going out to the web trying to find the right appropriate icons that they could associate with their data to create a chart like this. So we were looking at ways in which we could automate that process so that they didn't have to step out of their tool or out of the flow of analysis in order to create these semantically more meaningful charts. But I would say that semantics is not just about the visualization. It can occur in different stages all the way from data to visualization, from connecting to data, cleaning the data, transforming, analyzing, visualizing, all the way to, telling stories with data. And semantics is kind of a foundational layer that extends through all these steps from data to the visualization stage. So let's talk about an example where semantics is used in a stage that is not part of the actual visualization. So, early on, we had an algorithm in Tableau that could take a bunch of strings and automatically convert them into a date format. So something like this example, where on the left you see a bunch of birthday strings, and you can tell that they are strings because the type is mentioned as ABC. And on the right, you see the corresponding column converted into a date when you see this little date icon on top with the properly formatted dates. And this process is extremely important as part of the data cleaning process, because if these strings are not correctly converted into a column of dates, you are unable to visualize it in the form of a trend chart or a line chart, because trend lines have to use actual dates and not strings. But turns out that the number of date formats that our customers were trying to convert in Tableau was more than, thousands of formats. And our initial algorithm at Tableau was not doing a good job in converting strings to dates. So we ended up modifying the algorithm by looking at the context of the column. So if you look here, and let me see, I have an arrow here. So if you look at the second value here, 4/15/2008, we all know that there are only 12 months in a year, right? So 15 cannot correspond to a month. It's probably a date. So 4 is month, 15 is date, and 2008 is the year. So this algorithm just looked at the context of all the strings in the column, as well as the location of the author when they were creating this workbook, to try to discern automatically what the appropriate date format is. So the key takeaways of applying semantics to data is we want to make sure that we are communicating recognizable meaning to our intended audience. And this is, I would say, one of the first places where I started exploring how NLP and AI techniques could bridge this world of machine language and human language in the context of data analysis. And balancing that with perception and semantics, you can have these interesting and more effective conversations with data, as we're going to see in this next part of my talk, which is around intent. So this is a photo that I took when I went on a vacation to Hawaii. And we were driving in a rental car, and we saw this kind of beautiful sight where we saw this freshwater stream joining the ocean. the Pacific Ocean. And what I found extremely peaceful and profound about this was this stream was coming all the way from the high hilltops, maneuvering rocks and boulders and trees, and its intentionality was to meet the ocean. And this conversation that the stream was having with the ocean was simply beautiful. So to me, this is a way to inspire us to create more effective human-computer interfaces so that as a human, I can have a conversation with the computer around my data, and it can be this sort of seamless, beautiful transition without me having to think about it. So a part of that is understanding what analytical intent is. And analytical intent is defined as a goal that a user focuses on when they are performing a very specific task with their data or doing something much more open-ended. And as a user, there are several ways in which they can express their analytical intent to a system. They can directly pick attributes and choose a specific chart type, create a visualization that's a form of intent, or they can simply express their intent using natural language. So a lot of my work over the years at Tableau has been spent on understanding how human language can be converted into machine language. And it's a fairly hard subject. Even with GPT and LLMs, it can be pretty challenging because it is on a spectrum of vagueness. On the left, you find a lot more concrete concepts like find me the cheapest house or the cheapest place to buy dinner. And those are much more concrete because there can only be one cheapest entity, and those tend to be superlatives on these numerical quantities. But somewhere in the middle, you find these kind of graded adjectives. For example, I want to go to a good school. What does good mean? And what is not good? What does that cutoff look like? It's really hard to understand. Cheap food is very different from a cheap house. A cheap house in Bangalore, for instance, is very different from a cheap house, say in Mysore or maybe a smaller town. So these sorts of graded adjectives are relative. It depends on the context of the data and the situation. But even more challenging are what we call these subjective adjectives that are fuzzy. For instance, I'm interested in buying a house in a safe neighborhood or the best neighborhood. What does that mean? If I have a family with kids, I probably am interested in the schools near the house. But if it's a young working couple, they might be interested in restaurants and nightlife. So it's a very different, fuzzy, subjective context depending on the audience and the data. So a lot of the work has been exploring how we can use external information along with the current data for sense making. And what do I mean by that? Going to websites like Wikipedia. Wikipedia has a pretty knowledge base of events, temporal events. So if I want to know what is happening in a particular trend in my data, being able to augment that with external information from a site like Wikipedia can provide some additional context. Wolfram Alpha is also a really nice website. They even have a JavaScript API that you can actually connect to. And they have a lot of unit information. So if I need to find out, something like this, like find large earthquakes near California. So, I live in California and I actually live like 2 minutes from a fault line, an earthquake fault line. So we experience a lot of, minor earthquakes here. And if I'm looking at earthquake data that is published for my state here, and I ask a question in this natural language interface, find large earthquakes near California. And if you remember the spectrum from most concrete to fuzzy, large and near are kind of fuzzy concepts. What does large mean? For someone who is not living in an earthquake area, maybe they're less sensitive to earthquakes. So for them, large might mean a magnitude of 8 and larger on the Richter scale. But for someone who lives right near the fault line, they might be more sensitive, so they might have a lower threshold. The same thing happens with near. In a very densely populated area, near might have a very different meaning compared to something that is sparsely populated. So it can mean different things. So to sort of address this ambiguity in intent when a user is asking a question about their data and language, along with my research collaborators, we designed the system called EVISA, which actually was kind of the first precursors to a first natural language tool in Tableau, where the system automatically recognize these fuzzy concepts like large and near, and provide some defaults by indicating these widgets, these slider widgets. So I could slide 5 or 100 and change the setting, and the system would learn it. And so in a way, I was having this conversation with the system back and forth. The system would come up with an assumption, and I could correct the system, and the system would learn from it. As part of the system, I also explored what we call language pragmatics. And this is something that we do all the time when we're talking to other humans. So for example, you might, go to your friend and say, hey, do you want to have some lunch after this talk? And your friend might say, sure. And you're not going to ask the friend again, do you want, I don't know, is there like Pahara Kendra near BIT? I forget some of the, I remember going to Brahmin's Cafe a lot when I was a student. But, for example, you might ask your friend, do you want to go to Brahmin's Cafe? You probably won't say, do you want to go to Brahmin's Cafe for lunch? Because you just said lunch in the previous question. So this is called pragmatics, where we intentionally omit information because we don't want to be redundant. And I was interested in supporting language pragmatics in a computer-human interface like this. So maybe my first question was find large earthquakes near California. And as a follow-up, I would just say, how about near Texas, rather than saying, show me large earthquakes near Texas. And so the system takes the context from the previous question history and applies it to the subsequent question and tries to make sense of it and shows an appropriate visualization. Another thing that I was also interested in exploring is using scaffolds or looking at autocompletion to help with data discovery. So one of the challenges we saw with natural language interfaces was, twofold. People didn't know what question to ask and what was interesting to ask. So just like autocomplete that you have when you're typing in a question, say in Google, we were looking at a data-based autocompletion to help with this. So I'm just going to play this video and I'm going to talk over it. It doesn't have any audio. So here I am looking at coronavirus cases around the world. This was during the pandemic. And I say, show me cases in. And it shows a calendar widget and map widget. So I know, okay, United States is pretty dark. And I say US, and it updates the dashboard. And then I, scroll from January to March 2020. I see a lot of dark red, and I'm interested in it, and I pick that. So the video was very quick, but it kind of gives you a sense of how we use visual auto-completion to guide the user in terms of how they want to complete their question when they're asking about their data. Let me jump to the next screen. Oops. Okay. So the key takeaways as part of intent is when you're trying to support a conversation with your data, you need to provide affordances in the interface for a user to understand, repair, and refine. And scaffolds like what you saw in sneak peeks tend to support that intent, and they often depend on the medium. And so pragmatics, data, and medium all need to work together. For example, creating a tool on a laptop is very different from creating a tool on a mobile phone. The types of form factors are different, the modality is very different. So it's very important to understand how the medium works and how you want to support user intent. So coming back to the bento box that I showed at the beginning of the talk, how does semantics, intent, perception all come together? So the equivalent of a bento box in data visualization is a dashboard, which is a collection of coordinated visualizations that all work together to communicate a particular message. So this is a dashboard that was created by a very skilled Tableau author. Her name was Kelly Martin. And she was interested in looking at bird strike data. So if you look at this, she has this kind of wonderful way in which she uses these icons for bird, mammal, and reptile. And then you see this sort of slash of color here, which is a scatter plot, but she added shapes that look like a splatter of an animal hitting a plane. And then she has semantically resonant colors. So if you remember, I talked about the Stroop effect and how it's important that the colors are semantically meaningful when they're depicting data. So she has this color gradient from dawn to night. And she has this kind of wonderful way in which she's using space and color. So the charts are kind of in gray and pulled back, and your eyes are immediately drawn to the scatter plot where you see the splatter. And I think kind of going back to the bento box food image, there is also alignment. All the elements that comprise the dashboard are all aligned visually. So it's a really compelling example of how function goes hand in hand with aesthetics to create beauty in meaningful design. And I'm a really big fan of that. I don't, when I'm teaching data visualization to students, I always tell them, don't just quickly create a dashboard that looks extremely ugly. Sure, it probably serves its purpose, but if you spend some time in thoughtful design, that thoughtful design is also useful in communicating this message to your intended audience. So we spend a lot of time in class talking about design aesthetics as we're learning about data visualization. So I thought I would kind of talk, towards kind of the end of my talk in terms of what is next and where are we going in the field of data visualization. And a lot of people ask me, okay, with all the LLMs and GPT models that are coming out, is data visualization dead? Is it going to become redundant? And I think it's going to evolve. I don't think it's going to be redundant, but there's going to be new types of problems and opportunities that will evolve in the field. So as we've seen here, large language models are getting, larger. They have new capabilities. And most recently, I think GPT-4 has significantly been much more superior than all the previous models that you see on this kind of timeline. And there's kind of a dichotomy of how these LLMs are used. On one hand, you see that these language models have had these kind of success stories where AI was able to identify a new antibiotic for a drug-resistant bacteria. But at the same time, there's all this conversation on the dangers of AI. Does it risk extinction of the human species? Is it going to eliminate jobs? And so there is this debate and kind of this dichotomy between the benefits and some of the hazards of AI. So at Tableau, one of the goals of my research group is really helping a user in their cycle of analysis. And how do we actually use AI to augment that cycle of analysis? And so started exploring a bunch of projects that use GPT to sort of augment people when they're kind of exploring and trying to reason with their data. And so the main idea is actually, taken from Google. This is a screenshot of Google, when we were all like looking at case history of the pandemic in our local area. And you see here that Google generates dynamic content, and it also returns pre-existing documents from the web. And it's not just for the pandemic. If you put in an IPL cricket score in Google, when a cricket match is going, you can get kind of live, results of the score of the game with some trend charts and visuals, as well as pre-authored documents. So we were trying to kind of take this idea of hybrid search and figure out how do you actually do that in the context of people using Tableau server when they're searching for information. So we implemented this prototype, which we call Olio, where you can ask a question on top: how has the trend of movie budgets changed over time for different genres? And the system dynamically generates a line chart. It also generates a summary using GPT, and then returns pre-authored charts and Tableau workbooks that people in your organization have already authored. And this is just a snapshot of where we use GPT to generate the summary and the appropriate prompt that is used. And in this case, we pass in statistical information into GPT about the data, so that we can get a summary. And by passing in the statistical information, we try to avoid hallucinations or any incorrect summaries that GPT might produce, because that is one of the limitations of using these models. So I'm going to just briefly play a video of how this looks in action. So I start by typing in a query: what are average budgets by genre? And I hit enter, and it finds a matching data set, dynamically generates this bar chart that you see here, and goes to GPT and gets a summary of that bar chart. I can then type another question: show sales across the US. And here it matches two data sets. One is Superstore, but then I can go in and select an alternative data set, in this case, coffee sales, and it updates the chart and the summary. So a very kind of quick way of having this blend of dynamically generated content as well as pre-authored content. The second project is Snowy, where we use GPT to recommend questions to help guide a user during their visual analysis. And this basically addresses these two problems. What do you explore? There's so many attributes in the data. And how do I phrase my questions so I can get a meaningful visualization? So this is the interface of Snowy, where you can see these recommendations appearing on the right side panel, and I can click on the bottommost one: what is the trend of worldwide growth over the years? When I select it generates a line chart. And if you notice here that it updates with follow-up recommendations as well as new questions. So I can then, click on compare across content ratings, and then it updates the single chart into a multi-line chart or multivariate line chart where it splits it by content rating. And you notice that the follow-up questions and the new questions also get updated. So this is a feature that is coming out in Tableau. Yes, I will be finishing up soon. So this is a feature that's coming out in Tableau this year that uses GPT to provide these recommendations. But GPT, we do have a bunch of open issues. I mean, trust is always a problem. Communicating these explanations to a user can be challenging. And how do we actually augment that with the existing analytical capabilities in a tool like Tableau? But I will say that, visualizations have become extremely popular now in the world, particularly thanks to the pandemic, where flattened curve became a very common visualization. We're also looking at new domains. We are working with a lot of local restaurants here that have sensors in the kitchen, and they want to try to streamline food delivery, and they're looking at visualizations in real time to streamline the process, as well as looking at smart homes where you have appliances with sensors and you're trying to make sense of the data in real time. So a lot of these ideas that I talked about are actually in my book, and I'd be curious if you're interested, to kind of look at the various checklist items that I have in the book that have a bunch of questions saying, do the charts make sense as a composition? Are icons used? And you can kind of use this checklist to further refine your own charts and visualizations. And yeah, that's kind of a summary of my work. If you have any questions or thoughts, that is my email. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I just have the website of our research group out here again. And this is kind of a fun example where I asked DALL-E, which is a visual generation, a large language model, to create these functionally aesthetic chart examples. And here you can clearly see that, large language models still have a long way to go compared to a human. So yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about my work. Happy to stay on and answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you. I was worrying about your time. It is almost, I think, 12 in the midnight there.
Oh yeah, no problem. I sleep pretty late, so it's
Okay,
not
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you very much for taking us through your work at Tableau, and I'm very happy you have become really a professor, and also you're adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon, and professors always take a lot of time to explain the students. Today in this meeting, we have HODs of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning, Dr. Jyoti, and Computer Science HOD, Dr. Girin. They can come on video and you can say hi to all of them. And if they have any questions, they can ask. You can unmute yourself and you can ask briefly about anything that you would like to ask. So in the meanwhile, Vidya, now you have seen the world in India and there, and you're also a professor in Carnegie. And how is the teaching different there and here? And you have anything to say to our faculty present here?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I would encourage is really lean into kind of project-based experiential learning. I always tell my students, yes, grades are important, but they're not the only thing that's important. And you want to make sure that you're authentically learning information so you can apply it in the real world. So I think over the years, I have always reflected kind of on my own teaching content and curriculum. And I try to have a lot of assignments where the answers tend to be open-ended. Students have to think. Sometimes there's no one right answer. We have a lot of discussion. I do give a lot of, reading assignments, papers, news articles from TechCrunch. So I really want students to have a more holistic view of the world and the type of knowledge they learn and figure out how that can apply in a classroom setting. And I think that's really important in today's world because, yes, there are basics that you have to learn. In computer science, you need to understand how memory allocation works, understanding how programming works, computer architecture works. But you need to take those foundations and be able to kind of run with it. Because at the end of the day, when you have a real job in the industry, you are solving real problems, and not all of these problems are going to be found in a textbook, and you need to learn how to apply it. So that would kind of be kind of my personal reflection, being both a student and a teacher, to really hone in on kind of real world learning and reflection.
Yeah. Another important thing I would like to look for your feedback. The student community then and now, it is completely different.
Yeah.
And when you were a student, we used to give a lot of placement assistance, try to get as many companies as possible. But today, it is not like that. Many students don't even bother to attend the campus internships. It's very difficult to convince them to come and take the test. So here, the complete atmosphere and ecosystem in the country is like towards startups.
Yep.
In that direction also, the experiential learning, whatever you said, is very, very important. So how do you see that the student community should focus on entrepreneurship startups while they are in studying, or complete engineering and then look at those aspects?
Yeah, I think there are different pathways. I mean, for me, I ended up, finishing my entire education and then getting a job, right? And I did a lot of internships while I was a student to get some of that experience working in a company. So my suggestion is, if you are interested in pursuing higher education, you need to go all in, because once you kind of get the taste of money in kind of a full-time job, it's really hard to kind of go back and be a student. But at the same time, if you are a student and you're trying to explore what it looks like working at a company or in an institution, I highly encourage, finding projects. I don't know if, you still have the projects in 7th semester and 8th semester, or can you take these projects early on? But I'm a big fan of, trying to get internship opportunities and working on projects with, actual companies, so that you get a taste of how you can kind of apply the knowledge that you learn while you're at school, at BYTE, for instance, in a project that's sort of disconnected or a step away from classroom learning. So yeah.
Yeah, another thing is now I'm very happy that BIT has got a very good network of alumni like you, and I'm very happy and to connect many of our present students as soon as they complete the degree, either for the job or for the higher education. And now this initiative of connecting and exploring the possibilities and interacting and sharing the experiences of alumni through bit and byte is also getting importance among the student community. And I'm very happy that many of the alumni are eagerly looking forward for this kind of interactions. And what do you suggest? How else alumni can engage the present students and with the institute to give back, supporting in the projects, supporting in internships, training the students virtually? Because now it is very easy. Unlike those times, it is very easy wherever you are. You can support the faculty and students in giving the experiential learning.
Right. I think, having a mentor from the alumni network to be a facilitator in, projects, for instance. I think that is a very concrete way in which we can engage and sort of give back to the community, and students can kind of learn when they're engaging with the mentor. So that would be one example. Another example is, having some guest lectures, right? It's like, I don't know if data visualization is a subject taught, but, it could be a guest lecture as part of a classroom or a seminar series where students can take some seminar courses with alumni and, even get credits for that. So that could be another way of exposing students to some kind of new fields that might be outside the core curriculum within their engineering degree. So those, I think, are kind of two specific tangible ways to engage, especially now in kind of this online environment that we're part of and gotten used to.
Thank you. Any of the participants would like to ask anything?
Yeah, I'm happy to stay on.
Yeah. You can switch on your video also if you like. Okay. In fact, some of the students are also there. For me, this interaction, this was not just like other bit and byte sessions where we used to have direct question and answer sessions without any presentation. And since you are an expert in research, I thought we'll have slightly divert our regular interaction and take some inputs on the research. And this was very engaging, and I'm very happy. I'm sure the participants would have got more insights into the data visualization. And now people are talking about multidisciplinary research and other things. And even many of the organizations and ranking institutes are considering research as one of the major aspect for ranking the institutes and the individuals. That is because when you intensely involve in research, maybe the quality of teaching will also definitely improve. So maybe in that angle, you have the authority to teach the subject when you do a lot of study through the research. Maybe that is one of the reason. And I'm very happy that you have spent a lot of time with us today. And I'm sure in the days to come, all the participants, if there are any questions and if they would like to interact, I can email.
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I know
connect, and maybe they will get better support from our alumni. So I thank from the institute, BIT, from all the faculty side. Thank you very much for being with us and sharing your experiences. I wish you all the best, and my greetings to you and your family members. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for hosting me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Friends, this will continue the engagement with the alumni of BIT through this kind of interactions. We'll continue with the different topics and experience sharing the professional journey of our alumni who have reached in the industry, the various successful stories. And I will bring some other distinguished alumni maybe in another week's time. Till then, goodbye.